Every once in a while, you'll encounter a kit with a badly malformed part like this one. What can you do about it? Welcome back to my channel, and as always, thanks to my subscribers. This is the HO Scale Workshop Kit by Rusty Rail. This is a cast resin kit, and it includes cast-in detail on both sides of the walls. Like all resin kits, the molded pieces are occasionally warped, and I'll tell you how to deal with that in a moment. But in this case, the two side walls were significantly malformed. Both walls were significantly out of square on one corner. The casting was extremely thin in a few spots, allowing light to shine through, and the top of one wall was curved instead of straight. So how can we approach a kit with flawed pieces? The first possibility is to contact the manufacturer to see if replacement pieces are available. If you are the original owner, the manufacturer might even provide these at no cost. But the manufacturer might be out of business, or the kit might no longer be available. So what then? The second possibility is to toss the entire kit into the junk bin and move on. But if you know me at all, you know that I am never in favor of discarding a model just because it's not perfect. So in the end, we are left with one surefire, acceptable option: make it work. Since I have two very poor wall castings, I will demonstrate two different methods of dealing with these parts: repairing and replacing. Before I begin, let's discuss the problem of warped pieces. If you're going to build a cast resin kit, you should expect warped pieces and plan to deal with them. These three pieces, the floor and the two roof halves, were all badly warped when they came out of the package. I placed them on a plain, flat, 6-inch square ceramic tile. It cost 49 cents at my local big box store. And I popped them in a preheated toaster oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Do not heat the pieces indoors. Resin parts can give off some incredibly obnoxious fumes when heated. I moved my toaster oven to the patio for this step. When you remove the parts from the oven, still on the ceramic tile, check to be sure they have completely relaxed and flattened. You might need to place a paperback book on top of the parts as they cool to encourage the final flat shape. Don't use anything with a hard surface. This might damage the detail. With all of the parts as flat as you can get them, it is time to ensure that all of the parts are square and that the edges are straight and even. I started with the floor. The floor had a significant amount of casting flash at one end, making the part wider at that end. So I sanded the edge with my true sander until the edge was straight and the width of the floor was consistent. Next, I turned my attention to the left-hand wall. As you can see, the outside face of this wall was nice and flat, but the inside face, which must attach to the edge of the floor, was significantly curved. The wall was much thicker in the center than at either end. So I used my long sanding stick to flatten just the bottom edge of this wall to allow it to fit against the floor. Once that was done, I checked the ends of the wall to see if they were square. The left end, which attaches to the front of the garage, was nowhere near square, but the right end was pretty close. The bottom edge of the wall was just the right length to fit the floor, so I sanded the left end to make the wall square. This meant I would lose much of the upper framing stud at the left end. But since this will be at the front corner of the building, it will not be visible. At that point, I test fit the floor, the front wall, and the left wall together. As you can see, the fit is pretty good. You can also see that the stud at the left end of the sidewall is entirely hidden. But again, this shouldn't matter when the building has been assembled. Also note that the floor is too narrow at the front wall. It should extend all the way underneath the framing cast into the front wall piece. I glued a piece of styrene to the edge of the floor and sanded it to the proper width at the front and the back of the building. Once I was finished with that, I used my razor saw to give the surface a little texture. With the floor finished, I test fit the front, side, and back walls again. I was happy with the fit, but when I put the fourth wall in position, I could see it was going to take a lot of cutting and filing to make the wall fit. so I decided to use the second approach. I would build a new fourth wall from scratch. I used 80,000 square styrene for the top and bottom plates, and 60,000 square strip for the studs. Normally, I would use scale 2x4s or 20,000 by 40,000 strip for these pieces, but I wanted to match the appearance of the other interior walls. I needed to double the bottom plate to be sure the bottoms of the studs would be above floor level, so I cemented 2 strips of 80,000 square strip together. Then I cemented the bottom plate to the 2 end studs using my corner clamps to hold both corners square. When that assembly was dry, I used the corner clamps to hold the top plate square with both end studs and cemented it in place. Next, I cemented the remaining studs in place using a pair of horizontal braces as spacers between the studs. Once that assembly was dry, I cemented the braces in place, using the other interior wall as a pattern. When everything was dry, I test fit the framed wall in position. Rusty rail includes 3 workbenches to attach to the walls as you see fit. I selected 2 that would span the length of the fourth wall. They were a little warped, but I heated them with a hairdryer and gently straightened them out. Then I filed the backside smooth to give me a good gluing surface and glued them in place. Once the glue had cured, I put the wall back in position for a final test fit. There was one more thing I needed to do before I started painting. The left side wall had a hole in it where the casting was too thin. I covered the hole with some homemade corrugated siding. I placed a small piece of cheap, that is, very thin, aluminum foil over a metal file, and I burnished a texture into the foil. Then I cut out a small square and cemented it over the hole using CA glue. If you like, you can peel up 1 or more corners to emphasize that this is a repair. Finally, it's time to start painting. I started by priming the outsides of the 3 walls and the 2 roof pieces with Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch 2X flat black primer. I will be mounting lights inside this building, and I don't want any light shining through the walls. When that paint had cured, I painted both sides of the walls and the roof pieces with Rust-Oleum gray primer. I also primed both sides of the fourth wall with the same gray primer. I started by painting the floor. I painted the individual planks using 4 different light tan colors and 1 pale gray color. The result looks amazingly ugly, but we'll fix that with some washes. First, a wash of burnt sienna, then a wash of burnt umber, and finally a wash of black. This final wash is alcohol-based to allow it to flow into cracks and details more easily. Once that wash had dried, the floor looked much better. I used the same method to paint both sides of the building front and both sides of the front doors. Before I applied the burnt umber and black washes to the building front, I dry brushed dark gray on the inside of the sign, and I added the garage sign using dry transfer letters from Woodland Scenics. Next, I painted the 2 roof panels. I started by applying a coat of aluminum. When that was dry, I applied my standard black wash to dull the aluminum color. You need just 4 or 5 colors to give a rusted look to any surface: yellow ochre, raw sienna, burnt umber, and raw umber. I started with a wash of yellow ochre, followed by a wash of burnt sienna, followed by a wash of burnt umber. Be sure to let each wash dry thoroughly, or you'll end up with a muddy mess. Also, apply the washes unevenly. I mix my washes on the fly, dipping my brush in water first, then picking up a little color. This gives me a nice color variation. When the last wash was dry, I applied the raw umber by dabbing on the color using a torn grout sponge. This gives little dots of color, and you can control the amount of color very easily. I used a paper mask to achieve some sharp edges to highlight the cast-on corrugated metal panels, and I applied the most raw umber to the darkest panels from the final wash. I used the same method on the exterior walls, but I stopped with the burnt sienna wash, and I dabbed on burnt umber at the base of the walls and a little burnt sienna at the bottom of the upper courses of corrugated metal. I like this method because you can easily vary the amount of rust on the finished model. I painted the inside walls using aluminum where the corrugated metal shows between the studs, and I painted the studs a dark tan. I think the color I used was fawn. Then I painted the cast-on details using a variety of colors to highlight the detail. When all the paint was dry, I applied the same black wash over everything, metal, studs, and details. Finally, I printed some signs on plain paper and cut them out and glued them to the walls. For the fourth wall, the replacement, I used the exact same methods, except I primed and painted the two sides of the corrugated metal before I applied it to the outside of the wall. I glued the painted metal siding to the outside of the studs using superglue, and I glued paper signs to the inside of the wall, as I had with the other two walls. Now it's time for final assembly. Before I glue anything, I test fit the joints to be sure there is a good fit. The front wall fit nicely against the left-hand wall, as you see here, but it did not fit tight to the right-hand wall. There is a slight bow on the right side of the front wall, as you can see here. This is where the hairdryer is critical. Lay the part with the convex side down and heat the inside of the curve with the hairdryer. Take your time and heat the part slowly. Do not heat the entire part, just the portion that is curved. Eventually, you'll be able to straighten out the curve. Here is the fit after the part has been straightened. With a good fit between the front and both side walls double-checked, I glued the floor, the front wall, and the left-hand wall together, making sure everything was square and true. When the glue had cured, I placed the right-hand wall and the rear wall in position to double-check the fit. When I was satisfied, I glued the last two walls in position. Now is the time for any touch-up painting. I mentioned earlier that I planned to illuminate the interior of this building. Here is how I did it. I cut a length of 1/10 inch square styrene to fit between the front and back walls, as shown. I drilled two number 61 holes through the styrene for the LED leads, and I glued a Tichy lamp reflector in each hole. I primed and painted the entire assembly. Then I threaded two warm white LEDs up through the reflectors to the top of the styrene. I connected the LEDs in parallel with a 1000 ohm resistor on the common anode lead. This way, if one LED burns out, the other will remain lit. I threaded the two leads through the hole in the floor and soldered them to a male 1.25 millimeter JST plug. This allows me to plug this building into my DC power bus anywhere I like, and the building is interchangeable with every other illuminated structure on my layout. I installed the light fixture by gluing it into position. When the glue was solid, I secured all excess wire to the inside corners of the building with dabs of Aleene's tacky glue. If you plan to have the roof removable for viewing, you might want to paint the wires so they blend in with the rest of the paint job. With the building shell complete, it's time to install the roof. First, I test fit the two pieces into position to be sure everything would fit. Then I glued them in place using Aleene's tacky glue at the corners of the roof. If you want to keep your roof removable, skip the glue. Finally, I cut strips of corrugated metal wide enough to cover the ridge joint. The kit included a piece of corrugated metal for just this purpose. I bent the strips to form the peak of the roof, and when I was satisfied with the shape and the fit, I primed and painted them as before. Then I glued them in place along the roof ridge. I installed the front doors in the open position so the viewer can see the interior detail. Either I lost the rear door part or that part was missing from my kit. No matter, it's easy to fabricate a door that will go well with this building. I cut a template from cardstock to fit the door opening, and I used that template to build a door frame using 40 thousandths square styrene. When the glue had set and the frame was solid, I sliced off the template, then I primed and painted the frame to match the interior studs. I cut one of the spare corrugated metal pieces to size and glued the frame to the inside of the metal. The frame needs to be flush on one side, the hinge side, and there should be about 6 inches of extra middle around the other 3 sides. When that assembly was dry, I glued the door in position. I primed and painted a short length of 20 thousandths styrene rod. I cut hinges for all of the doors, 4 6-inch hinges for each of the front doors, and 3 4-inch hinges for the rear door. Finally, I cut the antlers off of a commercial deer figure and mounted them over the front door. One final note: just as I was completing this model, I received these replacement parts from Rusty Rail. These castings are much better, and they arrived just 9 days after I first contacted Rick at Rusty Rail. Perhaps I should have been more patient. But waiting for replacement parts would have defeated my purpose for making this video. That is, to demonstrate that you can build a realistic model even if some of the parts are damaged or missing. Please let me know if I've succeeded. In the description below this video, you'll find links to many of the products and tools I've mentioned. I love to read your comments and to respond to your questions. If you want to see more videos of this type, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.